What if I told you that the man who helped create the United States had the power to become its first king? George Washington had an army behind him. He had enormous popularity. He had the respect of an entire new nation. And after defeating the British Empire, some people feared that Washington might do what victorious generals had done throughout history: take absolute power. But Washington made a decision that shocked the world. Because the most powerful thing George Washington ever did was not winning a battle. It was walking away from power. And the story of how he got there begins decades earlier. Long before George Washington became the symbol of American independence, he was simply a young man growing up in colonial Virginia. Born in 1732, Washington came from a Virginia planter family. He never attended college. Instead, much of his education came from experience. As a teenager, Washington worked as a surveyor and traveled through the American frontier. He learned how to read the land, how to measure it, and how to survive in a dangerous wilderness. But the frontier would teach him something even more important. The British colonies were surrounded by competing interests, powerful European empires, and native nations. And before Washington became a revolutionary leader, he would first become a soldier. In 1754, when Washington was only 22, he became involved in a conflict in the Ohio country. It was part of the struggle between Britain and France for control of North America. Washington led a small Virginia force. But his first major military experience did not end in victory. His troops clashed with French forces and their native allies. Washington eventually surrendered at Fort Necessity. He had lost. But something unexpected happened. His name became known. The young Virginia officer had gained battlefield experience. And more importantly, he had learned what war was really like. Years later, those lessons would be. Christmas night, 1776. Washington's army was desperate. British and German forces controlled much of New Jersey. So Washington decided to attack. But first, his soldiers had to cross the icy Delaware River. The night was freezing. The water was dangerous. The men were exhausted. Yet Washington pushed forward. Through darkness and freezing conditions, the Continental soldiers crossed the river. Then they marched toward Trenton. Early the next morning, they attacked. The Battle of Trenton became a major American victory. It was not the largest battle of the Revolution. But it changed something incredibly important. Hope. The victory showed the soldiers that they could still fight. And it gave the Revolution new life. But Washington's greatest test was still waiting for him. The winter of 1777 to 1778 brought one of the darkest periods of the Revolution. Washington's army established its winter camp at Valley Forge. Conditions were brutal. Soldiers faced hunger, disease, cold, and a lack of proper clothing. Some soldiers did not even have adequate shoes. Thousands suffered. Some died. And Washington himself faced criticism. Some political leaders questioned whether he was the right man to command the army. But Washington stayed. He worked to strengthen the army. And during this period, the Continental soldiers received crucial training. One of the key figures was Friedrich Wilhelm von Steuben. Under disciplined training, the army became more organized, more professional, and more capable. Then another major development changed the war. France entered the conflict against Britain. America was no longer fighting alone. And the balance of power began to change. By 1781, the British position was becoming increasingly difficult. British General Charles Cornwallis moved his army to Yorktown, Virginia. Washington saw an opportunity. American and French forces moved toward Yorktown. French naval forces helped prevent British re-info. In 1789, George Washington became the first president of the United States. But there was no presidential rulebook. No former president to copy. No established traditions. Washington had to create the office himself. Every decision he made could become a precedent for future presidents. And Washington understood that. He knew the world was watching. Washington established the first presidential cabinet. He dealt with major disagreements among America's political leaders. He faced conflicts involving figures such as Alexander Hamilton and Thomas Jefferson. He also faced a difficult international problem. Europe was being consumed by war. Washington believed the young United States needed time to become stronger. In 1793, he issued the Neutrality Proclamation, attempting to keep America out of the conflict between Britain and revolutionary France. But America's political divisions continued to grow. Washington saw the danger. And in 1796, he made another extraordinary decision. He announced that he would not seek a third presidential term. He could have stayed. He was still enormously respected. But once again, Washington chose to walk away from power. Washington left the presidency in 1797 and returned to Mount Vernon. He had served as commander. He had helped win independence. He had become America's first president. And twice, he had voluntarily surrendered enormous power. In December 1799, Washington became seriously ill. On December 14, 1799, George Washington died at Mount Vernon. He was 67 years old. The country mourned the man who had helped lead it through its most dangerous years. But his greatest legacy was not simply his victories. It was the example he left behind. George Washington was not perfect. His life included contradictions that cannot be ignored, including his ownership of enslaved people. He made mistakes. He lost battles. He faced criticism. But his story changed American history. He could have tried to become America's king. Instead, he resigned his military command. He could have held on to political power. Instead, he left the presidency. And that created a powerful tradition. A leader could win and still step aside. A leader could hold enormous power and willingly give it back. That decision helped shape the young American Republic. It also created a question that historians still debate today. Was George Washington America's greatest leader because of the battles he won? Or because of the power he refused to keep? Now I want to hear your opinion. If you had been in Washington's position after the Revolution, with an army behind you and the support of the people, would you have given up that power? Or would you have used it to become the ruler of the new nation? Tell us your answer in the comments. And if you enjoy discovering the hidden stories behind American history, make sure to like this video and subscribe to The Hidden Chapter. Because history is not just about what happened. It is about the choices that changed everything. This is The Hidden Chapter, and there is always more to the story.